Hey, thanks for staying, and let's talk about the S&P 500. So you see, according to the S&P 500 Indices versus Active Scorecard, which tracks the performance of actively managed funds for the past 20 years, 80% of fund managers underperformed the S&P 500 in the 2021 financial year. Now that means that only 20% of professional money managers managed to beat the S&P 500 in 2021. In fact, for the past 12 years, in a row, large cap funds just keep taking big fat L's against the S&P 500. On a 10-year basis, 85% of funds actually lag behind the S&P 500. On a 15-year basis, it's 92%. So I think it's safe to assume, or rather basically to infer, that it is very, 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 very hard to outperform the S&P 500. In fact, I think it's so good that for retail investors, for the most part, getting into an index fund like the S&P 500 is probably a way better strategy than picking stocks, hands down. Now, however, everything I just said doesn't seem to apply to politicians. You see, in the United States, we have 535 members of Congress, 100 in the Senate, 435 in the U.S. House of Representatives. And in 2021, out of those 535, we had 105 who actually bought and sold nearly $300 million worth of stock. And that's according to a report from Unusual Whales. Now, what would you say if I told you that 35 of them actually managed to beat the S&P 500 last year? And thanks to Unusual Whales, we can actually see who are those talented 35 Congress members that basically beat the S&P 500 better than the fund managers. Right outside the top 5, who are all Republicans for some reason, at the 6th position, we have the top Democrat in this list, Speaker Nancy Pelosi. Now, Nancy Pelosi is currently in Taiwan, stirring shit up, but here's what she doesn't want us to talk about. Remember my magician example? And you might think that I'm a Nancy Pelosi hater. I'm not. I think there's a lot to be said about the hustle. You have to respect the hustle of Nancy Pelosi because she literally catapulted herself and her husband to a net worth of about $50 million with an annual salary of $220,000. I guess it's nice to have access to information about military contracts, infrastructure, investigations, enforcement, financial regulation. Though I'm sure none of these Congress members ever took advantage of their position, because as elected officials, they haven't for sure. And none of them make trades based on such information, yielding absurd S&P 500 gains. If you think that, you are a cynical person. Shame on you. Now, here's the crazy part. It's kind of sad that we have Democrats and Republicans basically not agreeing on anything, but agreeing on that. It's kind of hard to get Democrats and Republicans to agree on anything these days. But the list of those 35 members is pretty much evenly split in what seems to be a heartwarming, wholesome story of bipartisan agreement that trading based on non-public information about the market is a good idea. And you know how we blame politicians for being populists? How they flip like a Wiener Schnitzel based on some sort of poll or public opinion? Well, that is old news. They grew a pair. According to a poll from January this year by Data for Progress, 67% of voters support banning politicians from actively trading stocks. But as you can see, politicians are willing to go against the polls if it's a topic they're really passionate about. And they sure seem passionate about being able to trade stocks actively with access to non-public information. Now, to be fair, at least as far as Nancy Pelosi goes, it's not technically her who is doing the trading. It's her husband, Nancy Pelosi's husband, Paul Pelosi, who's a venture capitalist. I don't think it's a job, but that's just my own opinion, who regularly, buys and sells stocks and options. But it doesn't really matter. No, it doesn't matter if Pelosi's never speak to each other about these things. And maybe they don't, which as a married man myself, I struggle to believe. But here's the problem. Speaker Pelosi is exposed to confidential information, and she literally has power to affect the fate of the same companies in which her husband invests in his trades. That in itself should be enough for her to disqualify her husband from doing that. But when asked about that, she had a very interesting answer. She said, "We are a free market economy. We, the politicians, should be able to participate in that," she said. Well, let's break it down, shall we? A free economy means that everyone gets a fair shake. We all trade in the stock market and none of us has an edge besides the quality of our brains and our analysis. Now, having private information and trading based on such private information is a potentially market-destroying event. That is called insider trading, and that is highly illegal. Well, how illegal? Well, look, the punishment for insider trading in the United States is very severe. You're looking at $5 million in fines and 20 years in prison. Now, that is some serious penalties. But if trading based on private information is illegal, how come year after year politicians somehow manage to outperform the market by buying and selling stocks and options with access to non-public information about monetary policy, regulation, enforcement, government projects, and all that good stuff? Isn't that illegal? Well, it's kind of complicated. Allow me to explain. When I was 7 years old, the US enacted the Insider Trading Act of 1988, basically saying that trading in public company stock or other securities based on material, non-public information about the company is illegal. Now, not the nuance. Information about the company, not the market, not the Fed, not the government contracts. So having inside information about the market itself isn't really a problem, right? No wonder everybody's running for Congress these days. I mean, they all have this video game style infinite money glitch. However, this infinite money glitch extravaganza was supposed to be over in 2012 when they were supposed to close this loophole by enacting the Stock Act, which prohibited securities trades while possessing material non-public information about anything. And this little piece of legislation actually states specifically that it applies to members of Congress when they possess non-public information about anything. But here's a fun fact. In over a decade since this act was actually put in place, federal authorities have never ever prosecuted a member of Congress under the Stock Act. They only went after politicians when it was a classic insider information case, when they had information about the company itself. So yes, technically the government have prosecuted members of Congress for insider trading, but on information acquired outside of their congressional duties. Now, want to see how much more ridiculous this can get? Let's see the penalties. You see, the Stock Act requires every member of Congress to publicly file and disclose any financial transaction in stocks, options, bonds, securities, commodities, anything within 45 days. Now get this. Filing late for the first 30 days, no problemo. Zero penalties. So it's literally 2.5 months for you to report before they actually have to do anything to you. But wait, what happens if you're late? Well, filing late beyond the extra 30 days will set you back a cool $200. Do it again? Ooh, $600. No wonder nobody takes this thing serious. In fact, there's a lot of politicians who don't even bother filing these rinky-dink disclosures. Now, this is what happens when you let somebody supervise and regulate themselves. I sentence myself to no punishment. I'm such a good person. Case closed. Now, I say, let's be done with this bullshit. We can talk about Taiwan and China all day long, and they would love for us to have this distraction. But here's the real problem, and here's a problem we actually need to solve right now. And this problem is not in Taiwan, not in China, it's in the US. Remember, the stock market is a zero-sum game. If they win on a trade, by definition, you lose. Now, if they play fair, so be it. But if they don't, that is not acceptable. Now, the solution is glaringly obvious, and it does not lie within the boundaries of the Stock Act, which we now know is a total joke. We need to ban all members of Congress from actively trading in stocks and force those who did so since 2012, for the past 10 years, since they enacted the Joke Act, to pay these proceeds back as a fine. You want to invest in stocks? No problem. Invest in an index fund. You want to actively trade in individual stocks? Do not run for office. Simple. You can't have both. It's time to stop lying to ourselves. Don't let them bullshit you.